In a world that cannot stop speaking, the most dangerous individual is the one who chooses absolute silence. We are taught to fear the loud. We fear the roaring thunder, the aggressive shouting, the chaotic noise of the crowd. But history and human psychology tell a much darker truth. Noise is a sign of weakness. It is a desperate cry for validation. It is the armor of the insecure. But the quiet person, the one who sits in the corner of the room, observing everything, saying nothing, they do not need your approval. They do not fear your judgment. And that makes them unpredictable. When a person stops talking, their mind doesn't stop working. It becomes a fortress. They are measuring your words. They are calculating your moves. They are studying your flaws. While everyone else is burning their energy trying to be heard, the quiet soul is accumulating power. The ancient Stoics understood this mystery better than anyone. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled the entire Roman Empire, once noted that true strength lies not in the ability to shout, but in the absolute mastery over one's own tongue. To control your speech is to control your destiny. In this deep breakdown, we are not just looking at introverts. We are diving into the shadows of human nature to uncover the 10 dark Stoic lessons that explain why quiet people are truly dangerous. Not because they seek conflict, but because they have mastered the art of psychological warfare without firing a single shot. If you are a quiet soul, this is the blueprint of your hidden power. If you are surrounded by them, this is your warning. Let us begin with lesson number 1. Let us begin with a fundamental truth about human nature. The loudest person in the room is almost always the most vulnerable. They are driven by an invisible anxiety, a desperate need to fill the silence, to control the narrative, and to constantly broadcast their presence to ensure they are not forgotten. They lay all their cards on the table before the game has even begun. But the quiet individual operates on an entirely different psychological plane. They have mastered what the ancient Stoics called strategic observation. They do not enter a space to be seen, they enter to see. While others are busy projecting an image of themselves, the quiet person is running a silent, calculated diagnostic on everyone else. Think of the last time you were in a crowded social or professional setting. There is always someone dominating the conversation, laughing too loudly, trying too hard to impose their ego onto the room. Now, look closer at the shadows. Look at the person sitting back, sipping their drink, their eyes moving slowly, calmly, without malice, but with absolute precision. To the untrained eye, this person appears passive, perhaps even shy. But in reality, they are the most formidable entity in that space. Why? Because they are gathering intelligence. Every word spoken by the loud is a data point. Every nervous gesture, every boastful claim, every micro-expression of insecurity is logged, analyzed, and filed away. The grand strategist of Rome, the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, wrote extensively about this hidden power in his personal journals. He noted, "To understand the true nature of men, look at their desires, what they run after, and what they avoid. But most importantly, learn to look at them without letting them look through you." This is the essence of strategic observation. It is the ability to become a psychological mirror. When you are quiet, people naturally feel a bizarre, subconscious discomfort. Human beings detest silence. It forces them to confront their own thoughts. To escape this discomfort, they will talk. They will overshare. They will brag. They will complain. And eventually, if you give them enough time and enough silence, they will reveal their hidden motives, their deepest insecurities, and their vulnerabilities. By remaining completely silent, the quiet person forces you to play your hand. They don't need to interrogate you. Your own ego will do the work for them. They learn who is loyal and who is envious. They see who cracks under pressure and who hides behind a mask of arrogance. They map out the invisible political landscape of the room while remaining entirely invisible themselves. You cannot plan a counter-strategy against someone whose thoughts you cannot read, and that makes them profoundly dangerous. In the modern Western world, from the high-stakes corporate boardrooms of New York and London to the everyday social dynamics of our communities, information is the ultimate currency. The person who speaks less possesses the monopoly on this currency. They know everything about you, while you know absolutely nothing about them. They hold the blueprint to your mind, but their own fortress remains completely unmapped, guarded by an impenetrable wall of silence. But there is a deeper, darker layer to this Stoic discipline. Strategic observation is not just about gathering information. It is about cultivating an unshakable psychological resilience. Epictetus, another towering pillar of Stoic philosophy, famously taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so that we may listen twice as much as we speak. When you rush to speak, you are reacting to the world. You are letting external stimuli dictate your emotional state. If someone insults you and you instantly shout back, you have surrendered your power. You have proven that your emotions can be easily manipulated by an outsider. You are a puppet, and they have just pulled your strings. The strategically quiet person cannot be puppet. When met with an insult and provocation or a chaotic crisis, their immediate response is not speech. It is a cold, calculated pause. They observe the attack. They analyze the attacker's intent. They recognize that the insult is not a reflection of their worth, but a projection of the attacker's internal decay. By refusing to react instantly, they completely deflate the attacker's momentum. The loud antagonist expects an argument. Instead, they are met with a calm, piercing, unblinking stare. The silence stretches. It becomes heavy, suffocating, and terrifying. The attacker begins to question themselves. Why aren't they angry? What do they know that I don't? In that singular moment, the psychological balance of power completely flips. Without raising their voice, without uttering a single word, the quiet person has utterly dominated the interaction. This is why the quiet soul scales through life with such terrifying efficiency. They do not waste their energy on petty arguments or trivial debates. They save their power for things that truly matter. They allow the noise of the world to wash over them, filtering out the garbage, keeping only the raw data. They walk through life like an elite apex predator in an urban jungle, silent, lethal in their focus, and utterly unpredictable. Remember this: a closed mouth keeps an open mind. If you wish to build an unshakable life, you must first learn to close your lips and open your eyes. Stop trying to convince the world of your intelligence, your wealth, or your power. Let the fools shout from the rooftops. You belong in the shadows of contemplation, watching, learning, and preparing. As we move forward, we must look at how this intense observation transforms into an impenetrable defense system. This brings us directly to lesson number 2. Their silence is a shield against manipulation. In the grand theater of human interaction, manipulation is the invisible script. Every day, we walk through a minefield of psychological traps. Advertisers exploit our desires. Toxic acquaintances weaponize our guilt, and charismatic leaders prey on our need to belong. The modern world, from the aggressive corporate structures of London to the subtle social dynamics of Toronto, is fueled by emotional leverage. Most people fall victim to these traps not because they lack intelligence, but because they lack control. They are reactive. When a manipulator pulls an emotional string, they dance. They defend themselves. They explain themselves. They overreact. But the individual with a dark mind operates differently. They possess an impenetrable defense system that costs absolutely nothing to build, yet is impossible to break. That weapon is total, strategic silence. For a quiet person, silence is not a lack of words. It is a shield that completely neutralizes the psychology of manipulation. To understand why this shield is so lethal, we must first look at how a manipulator actually operates. Manipulation is not a one-way street. It requires a transaction. A manipulator throws out a bait, perhaps a subtle insult wrapped in a joke, a passive-aggressive comment, or a manufactured crisis designed to make you panic. They are starving for a reaction. Your reaction is their data. If you get angry, they know they can provoke you. If you become defensive, they know they have hit an insecurity. If you apologize quickly, they know they can dominate you. Now, imagine a manipulator executing their perfect psychological play against a strategically quiet person. They deliver their carefully crafted provocation, waiting for the familiar shift in body language, the defensive reply, or the nervous laughter. But instead, nothing happens. The quiet person simply looks at them. No anger in their eyes. No panic in their posture. Just a calm, steady, unblinking observation. The manipulator's words are met with a wall of absolute silence. In psychology, this creates an immediate, terrifying phenomenon known as a feedback vacuum. The manipulator has thrown a punch, but instead of hitting a target, they have swung into an empty abyss. Because there is no reaction, they have no data. They cannot tell if their trap worked, if they went too far, or if they just made a fool of themselves. The silence stretches from 2 seconds to 5, then to 10. And in that silence, the manipulator's confidence begins to violently decay. The ancient Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca once wrote, "Silence is a lesson learned through the many miseries of life." Seneca understood that speech is often an emotional leak. When you feel the desperate urge to explain yourself or defend your character to someone who has wronged you, you are handing them the keys to your emotional fortress. You are letting them know that their opinion of you possesses the power to disrupt your internal peace. The quiet soul follows the strict doctrine of Epictetus, who argued that external events cannot hurt you. Only your internal judgment of those events can cause you pain. When a toxic individual attempts to manipulate a quiet person through guilt or gaslighting, the quiet person immediately detaches their ego from the situation. They view the manipulator not as an enemy to fight, but as a fascinating specimen to study. They ask themselves silently, "Why is this person trying so hard to alter my emotional state? What insecurity are they trying to cover up?" By remaining silent, you don't just protect your own mind. You actively reverse the manipulation. Human beings are hardwired to despise social uncertainty. When a manipulator is confronted with absolute silence, their brain automatically enters a state of panic. To fill the suffocating quiet, they will almost always begin to over-explain themselves. Their arrogant posture collapses. They might say, "Oh, I was just joking," or "Don't take it so seriously," or they might even begin to contradict their original lie. Without you saying a single word, their own psychological desperation forces them to unmask themselves. They entered the interaction attempting to control you, but they leave the interaction completely controlled by their own anxiety. In Western society today, we are constantly conditioned to believe that winning an argument requires having the last word. We see it in our political debates, our media commentary, and our online shouting matches. We believe that the person who speaks the fastest, the sharpest, or the loudest is the one in control. But this is a massive illusion. True power is never loud. True power is the luxury of non-reaction. When you refuse to engage with a manipulator's drama, you are communicating the ultimate form of disrespect. You are telling them, without speaking, that they are not important enough to warrant an emotional response from you. You are showing them that their psychological games are completely irrelevant to your reality. Marcus Aurelius famously advised himself in his private journals, "You always have the option of having no opinion. There is no need to disturb your soul over things you cannot control." A manipulator is an external variable. You cannot control their malice, their lies, or their toxicity. but you have 100% control over your mouth and your mind. When you deploy your shield of silence, you are taking absolute ownership of your environment. You become a black hole for toxic energy. It enters your space, finds no friction, receives no reaction, and simply dies. So, the next time someone attempts to manipulate you, bait you into an argument, or guilt trip you into submission, remember the power of the dark mind. Do not shout. Do not explain. Do not defend. Simply look them in the eyes. Let the silence settle like heavy fog between you, and watch them dismantle their own trap. But protection is only the first phase of this ancient discipline. Once you learn how to shield your mind from external manipulation, your silence transforms into something far more profound. It frees you from the heavy chains of society's expectations. This brings us directly to lesson number 3. They do not burn energy for validation. We live in an era of unprecedented psychological bankruptcy. The modern landscape, stretching from the hyper-connected tech hubs of Silicon Valley to the relentless social structures of modern Western cities, is entirely driven by a single, addictive currency: external validation. People no longer live their lives, they broadcast them. They buy things they don't need, with money they don't have, to impress people they don't even like. Every action, every opinion, and every milestone is put on display, desperately waiting for the applause of the crowd. We have turned our minds into public property, begging strangers for permission to feel valuable. But the individual who masters the dark mind recognizes this for what it truly is: a psychological prison. They understand that the moment you seek someone else's approval, you have handed them complete ownership of your happiness. A quiet person is uniquely dangerous because they have completely severed this chain. They do not burn their precious life energy chasing the validation of a chaotic, fickle world. They have attained absolute freedom from the opinions of others. To fully grasp the power of this detachment, we must look at how the ancient Stoics viewed the concept of fame and praise. Marcus Aurelius, a man who possessed the ultimate form of earthly power as the Emperor of Rome, sat in his military tent during the Germanic campaigns and wrote these profound words to himself: "Does an emerald lose its beauty if no one praises it? Does gold, or ivory, or a little flower? An object that is truly beautiful needs nothing outside of itself to be complete." The emperor understood that value is internal. If you are a person of substance, character, and discipline, your worth is already absolute. It does not multiply when 1,000 fools cheer for you, and it does not decrease to 0 when they criticize you. Most people spend their entire lives performing on a stage. They speak louder to be noticed. They conform to trends to be accepted. They filter their true thoughts because they are terrified of being cast out by the tribe. This constant performance requires an immense amount of cognitive energy. It leaves the modern mind exhausted, anxious, and fragile. You are constantly monitoring how the world perceives you, which means you never have the time to actually build who you are. The strategically quiet person operates in the shadows of this performance. Because they do not speak to impress, they carry no burden. They do not care if the room thinks they are the smartest, the wealthiest, or the most successful. They allow others to underestimate them. In fact, they prefer it. When you allow the world to underestimate you, you gain the ultimate strategic advantage: invisibility. Your competitors do not see you as a threat. Manipulators find no ego to stroke or exploit. Arrogant people assume you are weak and lay down their guard, while the loud are busy exhausting themselves trying to prove their superiority. The quiet soul is peacefully working in silence, building real, unshakable power. The slave-turned-philosopher Epictetus delivered a brutal reality check on this subject. He taught that if you wish to make real progress in life, you must be willing to appear foolish, ignorant, or simple-minded to the outside world. You must let go of the desire to look like you have it all figured out. Think about the profound liberation in that mindset. When you no longer care about looking smart, you are free to listen, learn, and absorb information without your ego getting in the way. When you no longer care about looking wealthy, you save your resources to build actual, generational freedom. When you stop seeking the validation of the crowd loses all power over your destiny. This lack of vanity makes a quiet person terrifyingly unpredictable. You cannot control a man who wants nothing from you. You cannot bribe someone who does not care about status. You cannot hurt someone who has already accepted their own flaws and doesn't need your compliments to heal. When a loud person is ignored, they panic. They feel smaller, emptier, and weaker. But when a quiet person is ignored, they thrive. The silence gives them space to think. The isolation gives them time to build. They do not look at a lack of attention as rejection. They look at it as an elite form of privacy. Look closely at the most influential architects of history, science, and strategy. They were rarely the ones shouting in the public squares. They were the individuals who locked themselves away in dark rooms, completely detached from the superficial noise of society, focusing entirely on their craft. They knew that true validation doesn't come from a notification, a thumbs up, or a polite nod from a colleague. True validation is the cold, objective reality of your own self-mastery. If you wish to step out of the matrix of modern anxiety, you must learn to kill the performer inside you. Stop broadcasting your moves. Stop explaining your goals. Stop looking around the room to see who is watching you. Enter the shadows of the dark mind. Let your work speak for itself, and let your silence confuse those who cannot survive without applause. Build your temple in total secrecy, so that when the storm hits, your foundation remains completely untouched while the stage of the performer collapses into dust. But do not mistake this peaceful detachment for pacifism. A quiet soul does not seek conflict, but if they are pushed into a corner, Their response is not a loud, emotional outburst. It is something far more precise, cold, and devastating. This brings us directly to lesson number 4, the power of calculated retaliation. There is a dangerous misconception in modern society that silence equates to weakness. People assume that because you do not argue, you are afraid of conflict. They believe that because you swallow an insult without shouting back, you are submissive. In the loud, reactive environments of the Western world, from competitive corporate settings to aggressive social hierarchies, the aggressive fools mistake a quiet soul for easy prey. But they fail to realize that the most lethal weapon is the one you never see coming. A quiet person does not lack teeth. They simply choose not to bare them until the exact moment of the strike. Where the loud person relies on immediate, emotional outbursts, the individual with a dark mind relies on the terrifying power of calculated retaliation. To understand this dark Stoic discipline, we must look at how the untrained mind handles anger. When most people are wronged, insulted, or betrayed, their ego instantly takes control. They explode with rage. They shout, they make threats, they post online, or they launch into a chaotic counterattack. This immediate reaction is highly inefficient. When you strike back in a state of emotional chaos, you are sloppy. Your anger blinds you. You leave yourself exposed to counterattacks. You waste valuable energy, and worst of all, you give your adversary exactly what they want: validation that they have successfully disrupted your peace. The quiet individual operates on a timeline that spans months, even years. They do not react, they choose to respond. When met with malice, betrayal, or an intentional insult, they do not flinch. They do not defend their honor in the heat of the moment. They pull down their emotional iron curtain and let the silence settle. The great Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius provided the ultimate blueprint for this exact situation. He wrote one simple, devastating sentence in his private journals: "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." When someone attacks you, they expect you to descend into the mud and fight them on their level. By remaining entirely calm and silent, you refuse to grant them that satisfaction. You don't match their energy, you completely starve it. But do not mistake this for passive forgiveness. While the quiet person looks perfectly peaceful on the outside, their mind is performing a cold, surgical evaluation of the threat. They are not letting the injury go. They are storing it as raw intelligence. They evaluate the adversary's psychological weaknesses, their dependencies, and their structural flaws. They wait for the emotional noise of the conflict to die down completely, because they know that an enemy who thinks they have won is an enemy who will eventually lower their guard. Calculated retaliation is not driven by emotional malice. It is driven by cold, objective reality. A quiet person does not seek to hurt someone out of petty spite. They wait until the emotional climate is entirely cold. and then they execute a move that permanently neutralizes the threat. In a professional setting, this means they don't waste time gossiping or arguing with a toxic colleague. Instead, they quietly document every error, build their own indisputable leverage, and present the raw data to upper management months later at the exact moment a promotion is on the line. In personal dynamics, it means they don't scream at a traitor. They simply cut them off completely, pulling away their support, their network, and their presence without a single word of explanation, leaving the traitor to drown in the consequences of their own actions. The philosopher Epictetus famously stated, "It is not the person who reviles or strikes you who insults you, but your opinion that these things are insulting." The dark Stoic master takes this lesson and flips it into a strategic tool. Because they control their internal opinion, the insult carries zero weight. It cannot hurt their soul. Therefore, their retaliatory strike is entirely free from emotional bias. It is precise. It is clean. It is lethal. It is executed not to satisfy a wounded ego, but to establish absolute dominance and ensure the threat can never rise again. Think about the immense psychological terror this inflicts on an antagonist. When you argue with someone, they know exactly where you stand. They know your boundaries. They know your anger thresholds, and they can predict your next move. But how do you fight an enemy who receives your worst blow with a cold, unreadable smile? How do you defend yourself against someone who says absolutely nothing, yet continues to watch you with piercing, analytical eyes? The antagonist begins to lose sleep. They wander into a maze of paranoia, wondering, are they plotting against me? Did I push them too far? What are they waiting for? Your silence forces them to torture themselves with their own imagination. This is why you must never push a quiet person to their absolute limit. They do not bark. They do not growl. They do not warning shot. They simply observe. They calculate. And when the timing is mathematically perfect, they move. Step away from the childish need for immediate, loud victories. If someone wrongs you, do not give them the gift of your immediate anger. Seal your lips. Bury your ego. Step back into the shadows of tactical patience. Let them celebrate their temporary triumph while you quietly rearrange the entire chessboard under their feet. To maintain this level of tactical patience, however, requires a level of emotional discipline that regular humanity cannot comprehend. You must learn the art of becoming an enigma, a psychological locked vault that no outsider can pick. This brings us directly to lesson number 5. They are emotionally unreadable. Your face is a map of your vulnerabilities. Every time you roll your eyes in frustration, tighten your jaw in anger, or shift your gaze in nervous anxiety, you are broadcasting your internal state to the world. To the casual observer, these are just natural human reactions. But to a predator, a manipulator, or a fierce competitor, these micro-expressions are an open invitation. They tell the world exactly where you are weak, what triggers you, and how easily your peace of mind can be dismantled. Most people operate like open books. They believe that wearing their heart on their sleeve is a sign of authenticity. But in the brutal arena of human strategy, an open book is simply an easy target. The individual who has mastered the dark mind understands that absolute self-mastery begins with an unreadable countenance. They treat their face not as an emotional billboard, but as a fortress wall. They are emotionally unreadable. The profound depth of this discipline takes us back to the chillingly calm letters of Seneca. The great Stoic once observed, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He understood that when an external event occurs, the mind immediately rushes to create a narrative around it. If someone insults you, your imagination tells you that your status is threatened, and your body instantly reacts with a surge of adrenaline and an expression of defensive anger. But the quiet soul stands as the gatekeeper of their own mind. They receive the insult, but they halt the imagination. They refuse to assign an emotional value to the event. Because there is no internal panic, there is no external reaction. Their face remains as smooth and undisturbed as the surface of a deep, frozen lake. Imagine the immense psychological power of interacting with someone who reveals absolutely nothing. You try to insult them, their face does not flinch. You try to praise them, their posture does not inflate with pride. You try to threaten them, their eyes remain steady, calm, and completely focused on you. This absolute lack of reaction is deeply unsettling to the human psyche. It violates the natural laws of social feedback. When people cannot read you, they cannot predict you. And when people cannot predict you, they fear you. Your silence and your motionless expression become a massive psychological mirror that forces the other person to confront their own insecurities, doubts, and desperation. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius commanded himself in his personal journal to maintain an unshakable control over his physical frame. He wrote, "It is a supreme disgrace for the soul to surrender while the body still holds out. The mind must rule the face, keeping it disciplined and composed." Consider the profound weight of that command. If a Roman emperor, dealing with political betrayal, military invasions, and a devastating plague, could demand that his face reveal no weakness, then your daily frustrations are entirely manageable. There is no corporate meeting in London, no academic pressure in Boston, and no social conflict in Toronto that justifies surrendering the sovereignty of your facial expression. To cultivate this unreadable nature, you must learn the art of the strategic pause. When something unexpected occurs, a sudden crisis, an aggressive confrontation, or a piece of shocking news, most people react within a fraction of a second. That split-second reaction is entirely controlled by the primal, emotional brain. The dark mind demands a boundary. When the world pushes you, you do not push back immediately. You pause. For 3 seconds, you do absolutely nothing. You do not speak, you do not move a muscle in your face, and you do not blink. You allow the raw emotional wave to crash against your internal stoic wall and dissolve into nothingness. Only when your mind is entirely cold and rational do you choose your response, or choose to remain completely silent. In Western society today, people are praised for being expressive, loud, and hyperreactive. We are told to express every passing emotion, to vent our frustrations, and to let our feelings guide our behavior. But look closely at the individuals who hold actual, enduring power in this world. The high-stakes negotiators, the elite legal minds, the master strategists. They are never the ones making faces at the camera or reacting to every minor provocation. They are the ones who sit in absolute stillness, observing everything, revealing nothing. They know that information flows toward the silent, and power accumulates with the unreadable. When you become emotionally unreadable, you stop being a participant in other people's psychological games. You become the house. Manipulators will try to probe your boundaries, but they will find no entry point. Toxic individuals will try to trigger your anger, but their words will simply bounce off your cold, stone facade. You gain the ultimate luxury of modern life, absolute privacy of thought. So, draw down the iron curtain over your emotions. Let the world guess what you are thinking. Let them wonder if you are angry, pleased, plotting, or completely indifferent. Your internal peace is far too valuable to be bartered away for a temporary emotional reaction. Keep your mind dark, keep your face made of stone, and let your absolute composure shatter the confidence of those who thought they could control you. This brings us to the final, most critical realization of this journey. Silence is not just a shield, and it is not just a weapon. It is the ultimate alignment of your soul with the natural order of the universe. Let us conclude with the final synthesis, the sovereign mind. In modern Western society, solitude is treated like a disease. We are conditioned from birth to believe that to be alone is to be broken, rejected, or lonely. The hyper-connected culture of North America and Europe demands constant socialization. If you are not out networking in London, attending social gatherings in New York, or constantly validating your presence on digital networks, society labels you as an outcast. People have become so terrified of their own company that they will surround themselves with toxic acquaintances, superficial friends, and chaotic drama just to escape the terrifying silence of an empty room. But the individual who has mastered the dark mind looks at isolation through a completely different lens. They do not see solitude as a miserable prison. They see it as an elite training ground. They understand that the crowd is where minds go to die, where original thoughts are diluted by tribal conformity, and where precious focus is stolen by trivial noise. A quiet person is uniquely dangerous because they do not fear being alone. In fact, they weaponize their solitude to build an unshakable empire of the mind while the rest of the world is busy drowning in distractions. The brilliant Stoic master Musonius Rufus once remarked that a philosopher's true strength is forged not in the noise of the public square, but in the deliberate retreat into one's own mind. He recognized that when you are constantly surrounded by the opinions, anxieties, and desires of other people, your mind naturally absorbs their weaknesses. You begin to care about what they care about. You begin to fear what they fear. You lose the sovereignty of your own consciousness. When a strategically quiet person retreats into solitude, they are not hiding from the world. They are stepping away to gain a massive tactical advantage. Think of it as a strategic withdrawal in warfare. While others are burning their energy in petty social competitions, the quiet soul is sitting in a silent room, completely undisturbed. In this state of isolation, their cognitive clarity multiplies. They analyze their failures without the fog of emotion. They map out their long-term goals with surgical precision. They read, they study, and they master complex skills that require deep, uninterrupted focus. While the crowd is running in circles, chasing the temporary dopamine of social approval, the isolated strategist is quietly sharpening their blade. This absolute comfort with solitude makes a quiet person terrifyingly independent. Most people can be easily manipulated because they are terrified of social rejection. If a corrupt boss, a toxic partner, or an aggressive social circle threatens to cast them out, they will compromise their morals, their boundaries, and their dignity just to stay included. Their fear of being alone makes them weak, compliant, and easy to control. But you cannot threaten a person who genuinely loves their own company. If you threaten to walk out of their life, they will simply close the door behind you and enjoy the silence. If you try to exclude them from your social circle, you are merely handing them the privacy they wanted in the first place. By destroying the fear of isolation, they have destroyed your greatest leverage over them. They do not need your invitation to feel valuable. They do not need your network to feel successful. And they certainly do not need your approval to survive. This total independence makes them completely unbribable and utterly unpredictable. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this hidden fortress in his private meditations. He called it the inner citadel. He wrote, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Avail yourself constantly of this retirement and renew yourself." Notice that the ruler of the Western world did not look for peace and luxury, vacations, or public praise. He found it by turning inward into the absolute solitude of his own mind. The inner citadel is a fortress that no external enemy can breach. If you know how to retreat into your own mind, you can survive any crisis, endure any betrayal, and outlast any storm. In the modern professional landscapes of Canada and the United States, deep focus has become the rarest and most valuable commodity in existence. The average person cannot sit alone with their thoughts for 10 minutes without reaching for their phone to escape the quiet. Their minds are fragmented, scattered, and weak. The individual who can sit in a quiet room for hours, focusing on a single complex problem, a single dark truth, or a single massive project, possesses a near supernatural competitive advantage. They can accomplish in weeks what takes a distracted crowd an entire year to finish. Their solitude is not a state of emptiness. It is a state of intense, concentrated power. So, stop looking at your isolation as a disadvantage. Stop feeling guilty for choosing a quiet night at home over a chaotic social gathering. The shadows of contemplation are where true strength is born. Let the fools burn their energy trying to be the life of the party. Step into your inner citadel. Embrace the cold, beautiful silence of your own company. Use this time to rebuild your mind, master your emotions, and calculate your next moves with absolute clarity. Remember, the wolf does not lose sleep over the opinions of the sheep, and the strategist who commands their own solitude will always conquer the crowd that cannot survive without noise. But when the quiet strategist finally decides to emerge from their citadel and break their silence, they do not speak like the rest of the world. They do not waste breath on trivialities. When they speak, their words carry the explosive weight of a controlled eruption. This brings us directly to lesson number 7. They speak only when the words are heavier than silence. Verbal diarrhea is the epidemic of the modern age. In a world dominated by instant messaging, 24-hour news cycles, and social media commentary, human beings have developed a terrifying fear of dead air. From the frantic social circles of New York to corporate conference calls across North America, people speak simply to prove they exist. They gossip, they overshare, they repeat platitudes, and they speak before they think. They treat their voice like a machine gun, spraying endless streams of cheap, thoughtless words into the air, hoping something will stick. But the master of the dark mind treats speech like a sniper rifle. They do not fire blindly into the crowd. They understand a profound law of human dynamics. The value of a currency drops when there is too much of it in circulation. The same rule applies to your voice. The more you speak, the less weight your words carry. A quiet person is profoundly dangerous because they have mastered the art of meaningful speech. They operate under a strict, unforgiving doctrine. They speak only when their words are heavier than the silence they are about to shatter. The ancient Stoic philosopher Zeno of Citium, the very founder of Stoicism, used to tell his students a brutal truth. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may hear more and speak less. Better to trip with the feet than with the tongue. Think about that warning. A physical fall might bruise your body, but a reckless, emotional word can destroy a career, alienate a crucial ally, or reveal a strategic vulnerability that can never be hidden again. When you speak out of anger, excitement, or a desperate need to be noticed, You are letting the world see the inner workings of your emotional machinery. You are giving away your power for free. When a strategically quiet person enters a conversation, they do not fight for the microphone. They do not interrupt. They sit back, allowing others to exhaust their arguments, contradict themselves, and expose their egos. The quiet soul listens to what is being said, but more importantly, they listen to what is not being said. They analyze the subtext, the tone, and the hidden motives. Then, when the room has finally run out of breath and the chaotic noise has died down, the quiet person speaks. Because they have been silent for so long, the entire room instinctively shifts their attention toward them. The silence that preceded their voice acts like a massive magnifying glass. Every ear listens intently, and because their thoughts have been refined in the cold fires of strategic observation, their speech is not cheap. They do not deliver fluff or polite lies. They deliver a single, razor-sharp observation, a decisive solution, or a devastatingly honest truth. Their words land with the force of a psychological sledgehammer. They say in 2 sentences what the loud crowd couldn't articulate in 2 hours. Because their speech is rare, it is treated like gold. It is remembered, it is analyzed, and it is feared. The master philosopher Cato the Younger, one of the most unyielding Stoics in Roman history, was famous for his absolute silence in the Roman Senate. For days, he would sit in the councils, watching corrupt politicians argue, shout, and perform for the public. Lesser men thought Cato was weak or indifferent, but Cato was simply waiting. He only ascended the rostrum to speak when the fate of the republic was truly on the line. And when he did speak, his eloquence and moral weight were so overwhelming that he could paralyze the entire Senate with fear. He wrote, "I will begin to speak only when I am certain that what I am going to say is better left unsaid." In Western corporate and social structures today, people confuse talkativeness with leadership. They assume the person running the meeting or dominating the social gathering is the one in control. But this is an illusion. The loud person is merely a distraction. The true leader, the true danger, is the one who controls the room through the economy of their speech. When you refuse to engage in gossip, petty debates, or superficial small talk, you build an aura of profound mystery around your character. People don't know where you stand. They don't know if you agree with them or if you are privately dismantling their entire argument. This mystery creates respect. It forces others to step carefully around you. Furthermore, when you restrict your speech, you gain total control over your relationships. You stop leaking information. Manipulators cannot find leverage in your words because you haven't given them any. Competitors cannot anticipate your next pivot because you don't broadcast your plans. You become a psychological fortress, entirely sealed from external sabotage. Train yourself to embrace the discomfort of dead air. If someone asks you a question, do not rush to fill the void within a millisecond. Pause. Look them calmly in the eyes. Let the silence stretch for a moment while you formulate a precise, objective answer. Let the fools exhaust their minds with cheap noise. You belong to the elite school of the dark mind. Speak with intent, speak with gravity, and let your silence be the heavy canvas upon which your words draw absolute dominance. Remember, a fool is known by his endless speech, but a strategist is feared for the weight of his silence. But to speak with such devastating weight, you must first destroy the most vulnerable emotion known to man, the desperate fear of being abandoned, left behind, or forgotten by others. This brings us directly to lesson number 8. They have destroyed the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection is the invisible leash that society uses to control the masses. From the modern hyper-corporate boardrooms of Toronto to the intricate social circles of New York and London, human beings are trapped in a perpetual cycle of pleasing others. People alter their opinions, mute their true values, and tolerate toxic treatment from partners, employers, and friends simply because they cannot bear the thought of being excluded. The primal brain equates social banishment with death, and so modern man lives as a professional coward, begging for a seat at tables where they are not even respected. But the individual who has built a dark mind has executed this fear entirely. They look at rejection not as a devastating trauma, but as a natural, highly efficient filter. They have destroyed the desperate need to be included. A quiet person is uniquely dangerous because you cannot control someone who is completely at peace with walking away. By eliminating the fear of rejection, they have neutralized the greatest psychological lever that humanity could ever hold over them. The master Stoic philosopher Epictetus laid down the definitive blueprint for this level of emotional autonomy. He famously taught that man is not disturbed by things, but by the principles and notions which he forms concerning things. When someone rejects you, fires you, or excludes you from their social network, they have not taken anything away from your intrinsic worth. They have merely revealed their own alignment, their own limits, and their own choices. If you do not value their opinion as the ultimate source of your identity, their rejection carries no more weight than a passing breeze hitting a stone wall. Consider how a strategically quiet person handles a scenario of social or professional exclusion. When a toxic circle attempts to isolate them, or a manipulator threatens to abandon them, the expected human reaction is panic, an immediate attempt to bargain, apologize, or beg for reinstatement. But the quiet soul responds with absolute stillness. They receive the rejection, nod calmly, and step backward into their own solitude without uttering a single word of protest. They do not demand an explanation. They do not send long, emotional texts trying to change your mind. They do not launch defensive smear campaigns to save their public image. This absolute lack of friction is deeply terrifying to those who attempt to exclude them. The person who rejected them expects a reaction, They expect to see you hurt, begging, or at least angry. Your emotional pain is meant to validate their superiority. But when you meet their rejection with dead silence and a calm, indifferent departure, the psychological dynamic completely fractures. The rejecter suddenly feels a wave of intense uncertainty. They begin to ask themselves, did they even care about being here in the first place? Did they secretly want to leave? By refusing to react, you completely strip them of their power, transforming their calculated rejection into your deliberate liberation. Marcus Aurelius practiced this severe form of mental detachment daily while managing the fragile egos of the Roman aristocracy. He wrote in his personal journal, "It rests entirely with yourself to live a most beautiful life in the midst of any crowd, provided you remain indifferent to things indifferent." To the Stoic, the applause of the crowd and the rejection of the crowd are exactly the same thing. Variables that exist completely outside of your control, and therefore, variables that are completely unworthy of your emotional energy. If you are entirely anchored within your own character, your own purpose, and your own self-respect, you do not need a public cheering section to validate your existence. In Western society today, the obsession with being liked has created an entire generation of fragile, easily manipulated people. They are hyperreactive to criticism, terrified of losing their status, and constantly performing for validation. The individual with a dark mind breaks out of this matrix by actively embracing the shadows of exclusion. They don't seek to be hated, but they are perfectly content with being misunderstood. They allow people to form whatever false opinions they wish. They let the world think they are cold, arrogant, or simple-minded. They understand that trying to correct a fool's opinion of you is a massive waste of cognitive currency. They save their energy for execution, not explanation. When you destroy the fear of rejection, you gain a terrifying competitive advantage in life: the power of the clean cut. If an employer disrespects your boundaries, you don't complain. You quietly build your escape route and vanish. If a partner weaponizes silence to manipulate you, you accept the silence as a permanent exit and never look back. If a social circle requires you to wear a mask to belong, you simply take off the mask and walk out into the cold night alone. You become completely unbribable. No one can trap you in a toxic dynamic because you are always prepared to choose an empty room over a compromised soul. Stop begging for validation from a world that changes its mind every single hour. Step into the cold, unyielding power of your own sovereignty. Let people walk away if they choose to. Let the crowd close its doors to you. Your worth is not subject to a public vote. Build your fortress in the quiet spaces of self-mastery. Anchor your mind in ancient discipline and walk through life with the absolute certainty that the right doors will always open for a mind made of stone, while the wrong ones are simply filters keeping out the noise. But to maintain this absolute detachment from the crowd, You must possess an internal authority that rules over your own impulses with an iron fist. You cannot master the world until you have achieved total, uncompromised dominion over yourself. This brings us directly to lesson number 9. Absolute self-control is their ultimate dominance. The vast majority of human beings are not driven by logic. They are driven by impulse. They are slaves to their temporary emotions, their immediate desires, and their primitive instincts. If they feel a sudden surge of anger, they shout. If they feel an itch of curiosity, they look. If they feel a sting of insult, they lash out. Modern society, stretching from the hyper-stimulated consumer markets of the United States to the chaotic social environments of Europe, is engineered to exploit this reactivity. The world is constantly pulling your emotional triggers, looking for a cheap reaction, and treating your mind like an open playground. But the individual who has built a dark mind operates under a brutal, internal dictatorship. They do not allow their environment to dictate their internal peace, nor do they allow their passing emotions to control their behavior. They have achieved what the ancient Stoics regarded as the highest form of human achievement: absolute self-control. A quiet person is profoundly dangerous because they have conquered the beast inside themselves. And a person who can completely rule their own impulses can easily dominate any environment they step into. The legendary Stoic philosopher Epictetus laid down the hard reality of this dynamic in a single, devastating sentence. No man is free who is not master of himself. Epictetus understood that true power has nothing to do with commanding armies, accumulating massive wealth, or holding high corporate titles. If you can be easily provoked by a simple insult, if you lose your mind during a temporary crisis, or if you abandon your long-term strategy for a short-term hit of pleasure, you are a slave. You are an emotional hostage to whoever or whatever can trigger your impulses. Look closely at how a strategically quiet person handles a high-stress, confrontational environment. When a crisis hits, or when an aggressive adversary tries to corner them, the air becomes thick with tension. In those moments, the average human brain panics. Adrenaline floods the system, breathing becomes shallow, and the urge to scream, run, or violently defend one's ego becomes overwhelming. But the quiet soul stands completely still in the middle of the storm. They feel the anger, they feel the fear, and they feel the adrenaline, but they refuse to give those feelings a voice. They suppress the urge to react instantly, forcing their physical body into a state of absolute composure. Their breathing remains slow, their eyes remain steady, and their voice, when they choose to use it, remains terrifyingly calm. This absolute self-control is the ultimate form of psychological dominance. When an adversary is throwing a chaotic, emotional tantrum, they expect you to match their energy. They expect a chaotic shouting match. But when they are met with your cold, unblinking stillness, their psychological momentum violently shatters. Your calm makes them feel small, childish, and radically exposed. They realize that while they are completely out of control, you are entirely in command of the space. Without you firing a single shot, your absolute self-mastery strips them of their confidence and forces them to surrender the psychological upper hand. The Emperor Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself of this mental discipline during his darkest days ruling Rome. He wrote in his journals, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." This is the exact definition of a dark mind. You do not try to stop the waves of the world from crashing. You cannot stop people from being toxic. You cannot stop markets from crashing, and you cannot stop crises from occurring. But you can be the cliff. You let the chaos of the world smash against your unyielding stoic wall, and you watch it dissolve into harmless foam at your feet. In the modern Western world, self-control has become a critically endangered trait. People pride themselves on being raw, expressive, and reactive. They vent their every frustration online. They abandon their goals the moment they feel bored, and they let their fleeting moods dictate their entire destiny. Their minds are soft, fluid, and easily manipulated. The quiet strategist watches this cultural decay from the shadows. Because they possess the discipline to say no to their immediate impulses, they build an unshakable lifestyle. They can sit in a silent room for months, working on a complex project while their competitors are out partying. They can endure short-term financial hardship or social isolation to secure long-term, generational freedom. Their self-control gives them the luxury of playing the long game, and the long game always wins. True dominance is never loud, aggressive, or boastful. True dominance is the quiet, terrifying certainty that you own yourself. When you master your tongue, your expressions, and your reactions, you become completely untouchable. Your competitors can lie about you. Your enemies can plot against you. And the world can throw its worst storms at your door, but they will find no entry point into your mind. You are the sole ruler of your internal empire. Take the chains off your logic and place them firmly on your impulses. Stop letting your passing feelings run your life. When a provocation arrives, greet it with a cold pause. When a temptation calls, look it in the eye and decline. Step into the absolute dominion of the dark mind. Let the fools scream and drown in their own emotional chaos. You belong to the silent lineage of the stone cliff. Command your mind, control your frame, and let your unshakable discipline be the silent force that reshapes the world around you. Now, we have reached the absolute summit of this ancient path. When you have mastered observation, built your shield, destroyed your fear of rejection, and chained your impulses, you cease to be a mere participant in reality. You become something far more profound. This brings us directly to the final, ultimate chapter. Lesson number 10. They are the invisible architects of fate. We live in a world obsessed with the illusion of prominence. Modern culture, stretching from the hyper-visible elite structures of New York and London to the everyday social hierarchies of our communities, teaches us that to rule, one must be seen. We are told that power belongs to the loud politicians, the charismatic influencers, the aggressive corporate executives, and the individuals who constantly broadcast their achievements to the crowd. We assume that whoever holds the spotlight holds the leverage. But history, strategy, and deep human psychology reveal a much darker, colder truth. The spotlight is a highly efficient trap. The person in the spotlight is visible, predictable, and easily targeted. The individuals who wield actual, unshakable control over reality operate entirely in the shadows. They are the quiet souls who sit in the back of the room, saying nothing, observing everything, and pulling the invisible strings of cause and effect. They do not look for the crown, they look for the leverage. They are the invisible architects of fate. The ultimate philosophical synthesis of this master-level discipline belongs to the core teachings of Stoicism, the absolute alignment of the mind with the natural flow of the universe. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about this invisible power in his deepest meditations. He commanded himself, pass through this brief space of time in harmony with nature, and come to your journey's end in content, just as an olive falls when it is ripe, blessing the nature that produced it, and expressing gratitude to the tree on which it grew. To the untrained mind, this sounds like passive surrender. But to the master of the dark mind, this is the highest level of strategic manipulation. Alignment with nature means understanding the immutable laws of cause and effect. It means recognizing that human beings are fundamentally driven by their insecurities, their vanity, and their emotional reactivity. While the loud crowd is busy fighting individual battles, shouting at symptoms, and reacting to temporary crises, the quiet strategist is focused entirely on the root causes. They don't try to force the world to bend to their will through brute noise. Instead, they subtly alter the variables of the environment in total silence. Think about how an invisible architect executes their vision in modern professional or social landscapes. They do not enter an environment and declare their intentions. They do not brag about their goals, and they never threaten their rivals. They remain entirely quiet, allowing everyone else to play their predictable games of ego and validation. But while the fools are distracted by their own performances, the quiet person is quietly positioning themselves at the critical choke points of reality. They secure the vital information. They form the quiet alliances with the individuals who hold actual value. They build their financial independence in absolute secrecy, completely insulated from the volatile swings of social approval. By the time the crowd finally wakes up to what is happening, the quiet soul has already locked down the environment. The decision has already been made. The market has already shifted. The promotion has already been secured. The toxic antagonist has already been made irrelevant. The crowd looks around in utter confusion, wondering how this quiet, unassuming individual suddenly holds all the cards. They call it luck. They call it a sudden twist of fate. They completely fail to recognize that this outcome was mathematically calculated months ago in the cold silence of a dark room. The master philosopher Seneca delivered the definitive reality check for this long-term strategy. He wrote, "Let your mind be like a deep river, silent on the surface, but packing immense depth and power underneath." Most people are like shallow streams, noisy, turbulent, splashing over every minor rock and drying up during the first summer drought. But a deep river moves with massive, quiet momentum. It does not argue with the stones in its path. It simply flows around them, eroding them over time through absolute patience and consistency. It shapes the entire landscape without making a sound. When you embrace the identity of an invisible architect, you shed the fragile need to take credit for your moves. You don't care if the world knows you were the mastermind behind the victory. You let others wear the hollow crown and take the public applause, because you know that whoever takes the applause also takes the target. You prefer the absolute safety, freedom, and luxury of anonymous power. You control the outcome, while the loud performers take the blame when things collapse. You become a ghost in the machine of modern life, impossible to track, impossible to counter-stratify, and completely unshakable. We have reached the end of our dark breakdown. You have traveled through the shadows of human nature, from the art of strategic observation to the fortress of absolute self-control. You now hold the blueprint to an entirely different way of existing in this chaotic, loud world. The choice before you is absolute. You can return to the public stage, joining the shouting match of the crowd, begging for temporary validation, and letting your impulses run your destiny. Or you can step backward into the silent sanctuary of the dark mind. Close your mouth, open your eyes, cast off the fear of rejection, and build your temple in total secrecy. Let the world underestimate you. Let them think you are quiet, simple, or harmless. Keep your face made of stone. Keep your goals completely dark, and let your absolute composure be the silent force that commands the space. The world belongs to the loud until the silent decide to move. Step into the shadows of contemplation, master your internal empire, and become the invisible architect of your own unshakable fate. We have traveled through the darkest corridors of human behavior and scaled the highest peaks of ancient discipline. You now hold the 10 rules of the sovereign mind. You know how to watch without being seen, how to shield your peace against malice, and how to build a life that requires no validation from the crowd. But remember, philosophy is not a performance. It is a daily, silent practice. The truths you have absorbed tonight are not meant to be debated with others. They are meant to be lived in the quiet spaces of your own reality. The world outside your door will remain loud, reactive, and chaotic. Tomorrow, it will try to pull your strings, bait your anger, and demand your attention. But you are no longer the person you were an hour ago. You are the cliff. You are the deep river. You are the master of the absolute pause. As the night settles and the noise of the day finally collapses into stillness, let your mind release its burdens. Let your breathing slow down. You have done the heavy work of reflection. Now, it is time to allow your temple to rest. If you are using this journey to transition into a deep, peaceful sleep, let the weight of the world drift away. Close your eyes. Enter the quiet sanctuary of your subconscious mind and rest with the absolute certainty that your fate is entirely secure in your own hands. However, if your mind is still awake, tracing the shadows of contemplation, or if you are quietly working through the late hours of the night, remember that you are not alone in the dark. If you are still with us, take a moment to subscribe to Dark Mind and turn on the notification bell. By joining this silent brotherhood, you ensure that you will never miss our weekly premium audiobooks. Let us continue to study the unseen forces of the mind, strip away the illusions of the crowd, and build an unshakable fortress of self-mastery together. Thank you for your time, your silence, and your focus.